Welcome into the install with Greg Cosell of NFL Films. We got all-star games going on right now because the Super Bowl is set and everybody's just killing time until the last football game of the season, except for Greg, because Greg is grinding as always. And we're happy to be able to talk about how we got to this point, first and foremost, and some coaching fits today. Before next week, Greg, we preview the Eagles and the Chiefs getting back together for Super Bowl 59.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure at the beginning of the season people thought the Eagles would be here, but they are. And it's obviously a rematch of 2022. I think that I would say both teams are probably a little different from 2022. I know a lot of people might say, well, look at that game. I don't know I mean, they obviously Steve Spagnuolo is still the DC for the Chiefs, Andy Reid's still the head coach. A lot of the concepts would probably be similar, but I think the team is different. And the Eagles, obviously, totally different coaching staff, so they're in many ways totally different, even if some of the players are the same.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun preview for us next week because I'm really curious to get your thoughts on a lot of these old heads. A lot of these guys have been around the league for a long time, going at it between Fangio and Andy Reid, and
Yeah,
how
yeah,
that's going to look. Spagnuolo obviously been in a lot of these games over the course of his career in various stops, so that's going to be a fun tactical look when we get to breaking down that game. But in the meantime, Greg, I'd like to talk about the two conference championship games. I'd like to start to your point about the Eagles. Their rushing attack, obviously, they're getting the top 100th percentile Saquon Barkley season. He's never been this
yeah. Oh,
healthy, and it's been awesome to see. But I want, if you can, to kind of touch on what Kellen Moore has done with Saquon Barkley and this Eagles rushing attack in general, because it's a force of nature right now. 55-23 was the final score
yeah,
against Washington. 7 rushing touchdowns, Greg. It was
yeah.
great.
I mean, it's the game was a little closer than the score, but the point is, the Eagles are a little bit of antithetical to what most people assume that you have to be on offense, in the sense that you have to create your explosive plays from the passing game, because percentage-wise, more explosive plays come from the passing game than the running game. The Eagles, in some ways, are the opposite of that. And I'm not referring to numbers. I'm sure they do have more 20 plus yard completions than Barkley has 20-yard runs. So I don't want people to say, well, you don't know what you're talking about. But the point is they get a lot of explosive plays in the run game. And that is truly part of their offense. I thought in the championship game, Kellen Moore did an outstanding job, because I think when you're an OC, um, first of all, you have a philosophy and a worldview of how you want to play. But then the players dictate what parts of your playbook, what parts of your worldview will be emphasized versus what others maybe are not emphasized because of the nature of your personnel. Um, and I think as they went through the season, they realized what the strengths of Jalen Hurts were, because you still have to play to your quarterback. We've discussed that many times. They realized the strengths, but they also realized the limitations. And then they realized as well that they have arguably the best run blocking O line in football. It's certainly the biggest. And they've got a great back. And that let's let's use that as our foundation and play off that. And that's not in and of itself profound, but it's the way they do it. And I thought it really came to fruition beautifully against the Commanders. Because think about this. If I said to you, before a game, and this is football stuff. If I said to you before a game that a quarterback's going to drop back more than 30 times and he's not going to throw one ball in the entire game between the numbers, you'd say, well, you can't really play like that in the NFL. That's what happened in the Eagles game. Jalen Hurts did not make one throw between the numbers. And I'm not talking about a 2 yard check down. I'm talking
Right.
about a real throw. He didn't make one throw between the numbers, because you know what? Against zone coverage, he's not very good at that. That's not his game. He's not a window thrower between the numbers. And they know that. So they don't really ask him to do that. And there were a couple of times I think there were 2 plays I saw in which I thought throws were there, but that's just not his comfort level. But they do some other really good things with him. And what cannot be overstated, Buck, and then I'll stop. I feel like I'm, the stream of consciousness.
No,
People
it's
don't know
it's
what we're going
it's
to talk
such a
about before you
fascinating
ask me. So it's
offense,
stream
Greg,
of
and I
consciousness.
No, I really value this
What what
perspective.
what can't be overstated is he never turns the ball over. Okay. And in the context of their entire team, with how good that defense is, to always make the opposing offense have to go 75, 80, 85, 90 yards, that's a big deal. So it cannot be overstated that Jalen Hurts does not turn the ball over.
And in these playoff games, it simply come down to that. I mean, the Commanders had four turnovers.
Yeah.
We'll talk about the Bills. They didn't turn the ball over necessarily, but they couldn't hang on to it. Four fumbles total, and they couldn't capitalize on the one Chiefs giveaway that was had in that game. But no, I really appreciate that stream of consciousness because the Eagles, it's such a fascinating thing to watch how they've adapted over the course of time and how they've really maximized Jalen Hurts as that high level complementary piece to what they're able to do on the ground. And it's just been so cool to see Saquon
And
be
you can't lose
healthy all
sight of
year
the
long.
fact, yeah, you can't lose sight of the fact that he's a big factor in their run game
Yeah.
because he's in the gun with Barkley offset 98% of the time. So you have a zone read element on almost every play, even though obviously they don't run it, that much, but it's there. And that means the defense has to align to prepare for it, because you don't know. So that means they have to align maybe differently than if, when Jared Goff's in the gun, I mean, it adds another layer to their offense. There's a lot of layers to what they do that are really, really good things. I mean, it's just good football.
Speaking of which, that's a perfect transition to talk about Steve Spagnuolo because he in this game against the Bills, Greg, just listening to some of the Bills players talk about it after the fact and like some of the pressures that we know that Spagnuolo has become
Yep.
famous for and how great we talk about innate sense for players, quarterbacks, just what an innate sense he has for some of these pressures that he brings. It's almost as fun. I'm not going to say it's as fun as the Chiefs offense is to watch, but it's really, really good
Yeah,
football.
no, and the thing is, it's not as if he's a high percentage blitzer, Buck. He's
Right.
not one of those guys that, 50% of the time he's just coming. It's so situational and it's so good. And he uses his defensive backs as blitzers as well or better than anybody in the league. And that's hard. I mean, I talk to Ross Tucker every week, a former O-lineman, Ross. And these guys, when your hand's in the dirt and your field of vision is not really looking at defensive backs, and he does such a good job of deploying them as part of his pressure schemes. It's really hard. I know everybody's talking about that last play. There's so many factors there. Everybody seems to have an easy answer to that. There's no easy answer to that, as you well know. But he just does such a good job. It's so situational. And yeah, it's hard. It'll be interesting, and we'll get to that next week when we preview the Super Bowl. It's going to be very interesting to see how he does that against the Eagles. Because, one thing about the Eagles is they stay on schedule. For the Eagles, when it's 2nd and 5 or 3rd and 3, I mean, those are just routine plays. And they're a four-down offense. And unless they're deep in their own territory, they're a four-down offense. And they're hard to, when it's 4th and 2, they're a very difficult team to stop.
Yeah, the benefits of that offensive line just being overwhelming all year long. Looking forward to getting into that next week. I mean, for the Bills on defense, though, Greg, Patrick Mahomes able to get after them. The Chiefs able to be efficient for the most part against that Bills defense, and that's every game is a sample size unto itself. But I wonder what you saw specifically in the way that Andy Reid went about attacking Sean McDermott's unit.
Well, the Chiefs are a fascinating offense because, and again, we don't know what's going to happen in 10 days. We don't know that. But what we do know is what we have. And what we have is that the Chiefs this year have really become a sustaining style offense. They're not a big play offense. I was really struck as I was doing research over these last number of weeks that during the regular season, Xavier Worthy only had four receptions of 20 yards. Think about that. Xavier Worthy, the fastest man on the planet, had
Right.
just four receptions of over 20 yards. Their offense is built on converting third downs. They're great at it, and they do it very schematically. And of course, you have Mahomes' legs. That's a big factor. And they got better and better as the season progressed in the red zone. They do some really cool things. Like I'll give you an example. The Kareem Hunt touchdown that ended their first possession, when Mahomes ran for a touchdown in the fourth quarter to put them up 29-22, was the exact same play. I don't know if you're aware of that. It was the exact same play. Just the first time Mahomes handed it to Hunt, the second times he kept. We don't know if there's an option. We don't know that stuff, and they're not going to announce it. But it was the exact same play. They're really good schematically in what they do. And this has not been a year where Mahomes has really driven the ball down the field. And again, we don't know what's going to happen. This is what we have up to this point. But they're so good at just sustaining offense and converting third downs. That has really been how they've played offense much of this season.
To your point, Greg, about being able to utilize different plays out of the same formations using the same personnel groups, Andy Reid is as good as anybody
Yeah.
when it comes to that. And you saw the fruits of that certainly against the Bills defense in that
And I
game.
will say one more thing, and I've given this a lot of thought, and to me, it's not a bold, controversial statement at all. If you look at the Bills roster, defensively, they don't really have an impact player. They've got some nice players. Milano's a really nice player. Bernard's a nice player. Um, Rousseau, who was really kind of a non-factor in this game, you'd call him a good player. Their secondary is really, by NFL standards, not that good. They don't have really much at the skill positions on offense. I think Shakir, I really like Shakir, but I think
Mhm.
we'd agree he's probably a nice number three. You know, yeah, they have a really good O-line and a good run game. Not a dominant run game. It's not a week to week, oh my God, dominant run game. And they've got Josh Allen. So, they're given their roster and what they've been able to accomplish over recent years is pretty impressive because it's not a big time roster.
Yeah,
And
and
I've
they
given
obviously had to pare that roster down due to salary cap stuff that we
Yep,
talked about in
yep.
the offseason, and we'll see how they go about adjusting that. I know them and the Ravens are kind of in similar situations from
Yeah,
a financial standpoint, which we don't get into around here,
right,
but
right. But I mean it's going to
still
be
plays a
interesting.
role.
Yeah, it does play a role. It plays a role in team building, and that's really so much of what it comes down to.
Yeah. Team building involves coaching staff changes, hirings, firings, as we've worked our way through that in the last couple of weeks, Greg. We still do have, speaking of Kellen Moore, we still do have one opening in the NFL. It seems more likely than not that the Saints are going to hire Kellen
Looks
Moore.
like
At
it.
what point they are able to do so, obviously, as the Eagles get ready for the Super Bowl. But the AFC South has some pretty critical coaching changes. Liam Cohen is now the head coach in Jacksonville. You've got Lou Anarumo, the former Bengals defensive coordinator, going to the Colts. And the Texans let go of offensive coordinator Bobby Slowick after a 10-win season and winning the division. And uh, what I would unprofessionally describe as a herky-jerky offensive experience for Houston this year, Greg.
Yeah, they didn't name a new OC, did they?
Not to my knowledge. I keep
No.
checking these coaching tracker
Yeah, I
updates
don't think
on
they have.
NFL.com.
Um, you know how it works. And it's really two different skill sets, but that's not the way it works in the real world. I mean, and I'm thinking of Liam Cohen. Obviously,
Right.
he was brought in to turn Trevor Lawrence into what many believe he can be, which should be a top five quarterback in the league. He's shown flashes of being that guy, but it really hasn't all come together, and we're not there, so we don't know all the reasons. But it just hasn't come together to that point. So he was brought in for that reason. Now, that particular skill set of being able to develop a quarterback and be an excellent play call, game planner and play caller has nothing to do with whether you're a good head coach, but we'll find out. But that's why he was clearly brought in to make Trevor Lawrence, who they signed, I believe, last offseason to a huge deal. So Trevor Lawrence isn't going anywhere. So and really, and I always come back to what Dick Vermeil said. Lawrence has obviously been there for a number of years now, but Dick Vermeil, when he used to come watch tape with us here when Ron Jaworski was on the matchup show, would always say that when you draft a quarterback number one or top five, that everything about the whole building has to be geared toward making that guy a great player. So that's essentially what they're doing, even though it's 4 or 5 years removed from when he was drafted number one. Everything has to be about making Trevor Lawrence a great player because if he's not, then you're not a
Yeah.
good team. I mean, it's
Yeah.
that's just the reality of life. So, if by chance, and we have no idea, but if by chance the Titans were to draft Cam Ward, but everything in the building has to be about making Cam Ward great. It's just the way it goes. But So that's why Liam Cohen was brought in. And I guess we'll find out about the other stuff with the head coaching. But those are two different skill sets. So, we just don't know the answer to those questions.
Yeah, Brian Callahan will tell you exactly that. He compared
Yeah.
being a first-year NFL head coach to raising kids. People can give you advice on the front end, but nobody
Right,
can
right.
really prepare you for the experience. And I think that that was a lot of people were able to identify that. And there were some obvious growing pains here in Tennessee. Doesn't mean that, Brian Callahan's not going to be good at this job
No,
or
no,
not be
it's
able
yeah,
to
no
substantially improve.
question.
As you said, we simply don't have enough
You don't
information
know.
at
You,
this point in time.
Yeah, the
The
Houston
Anarumo thing.
situation fascinates me because, again, I know a lot of people criticized Slowick during the season. You know me, I don't criticize coaches because I'm not there for the process. And to me, if you're not there for the process, you don't really have the necessary information. So I don't know what went on a daily basis. Clearly, D'Amico Ryans felt that something was lacking. I mean, it was evident watching tape that CJ Stroud was not the same player this year that he was as a rookie, when everybody just assumed that this year he'd be a top five quarterback in the league, and he
Yeah.
wasn't. He was inconsistent. I mean, the traits are still present, but just the execution of those traits were not. And the I think the reflexive response when a quarterback who people think is really good doesn't play well and the offense doesn't perform to the level, based on what people think the talent level is, the reflexive response is bad coaching. That's
Yeah.
the reflective. I, I don't respond that way because I think there's way more involved. Like I said, we're not in the building. So I don't know, but they felt that. And obviously that's all that matters because Bobby Slowick's not there anymore.
Yeah, and we'll see what their approach ends up being. Perhaps they'll have an offensive coordinator hire when next we speak. Just quickly, while we have a few minutes left here, Greg, I wonder what you made of Ben Johnson going from the
Yeah.
Detroit Lions to become the head coach of the Chicago Bears. To your point about Liam Cohen, no idea how those two different skill sets are going to translate as an offensive coach, as a play caller, and now being a CEO and trying to do both jobs, which is a difficult balance. They're two different kind of quarterbacks, though, obviously, in Goff and Caleb
Yeah.
Williams. I wonder what you just thought from a 1,000-foot view about the general adjustments that'll have to be there.
Well, that's fast. And he obviously was brought in because of Caleb Williams, because again, just gets back to our point. They have Caleb Williams has to become a great player. Yeah, I mean, that's the bottom line. If you're a Bears guy, he has to become a great player. I think even though Goff and Williams are clearly different players, um, Williams has to move more toward Goff and not become Goff. I don't want people to think I'm saying he's got to be just a pocket player and you don't want him to move, but he has to develop more of the traits that are necessary to play from the pocket. At some point, you've got to be able to do that at a reasonably high level. I mean, Goff is a high level pocket quarterback, and obviously he's not going to give you much in the way of a playmaking dimension. People again throw out, well, you can't really play quarterback in the NFL now unless you can run around. Yeah, I think we all understand that you have to be able to move. I think we get that, but that's a very broad statement that really is too vague to mean anything. So I think with Caleb Williams, you really have to teach him sort of the refinements and subtleties and nuances of the position. And Ben Johnson, I think, was brought in to do that. And again, it's like with any quarterback that can move. It's like with Joe Brady, and I know he's taking heat for this last game, but that's irrelevant. It's like what Joe Brady essentially did to some degree with Josh Allen, is that you're not going to say don't move, but you also want your quarterback to be able to play within structure, within timing, within rhythm, to keep your offense on schedule, to do all those good things. And I think that Caleb Williams, while the traits are clearly there, I mean, he throws a beautiful ball. I mean, the guy has great traits. Um, but he's got to learn how to play quarterback at the NFL level. I remember Mike Tannenbaum telling me, um, and not just me, but in our 33rd team conversations, that history shows that quarterbacks that get sacked a lot in college, and by the way, Caleb Williams was sacked over 80 times in 2 years at USC, that doesn't change in the NFL, that it rarely does. So we saw him get sacked a lot this year. And again, what's the reflexive reaction? O-line stinks.
Yeah.
Well, you got to watch every play. And you know what? Was the O-line great? Of course not. But so many of them were on Caleb Williams, not really having a feel for what how to play, and I think that Ben Johnson was brought in to kind of teach him those subtleties so the traits can really come out because the traits are high level.
Yeah, I do think that's something that, sometimes fans can lose sight of. And it's understandable that traits, need refinement to
Yep.
help translate into legitimate skill at this level. And that's kind of what the process is all about, which is less sexy to talk about, but still very critical to the development of these young players, specifically to your point about everything being in service of a number one overall draft pick at quarterback.
Right. And that's what you're trying to do. So we'll see. I mean, look, Williams is the way he throws a ball. I mean, it's fun to watch. I mean, that kid just is such an easy thrower of the football. He's a beautiful thrower of the football, and obviously he's got great movement. He's a good athlete, but you know, there's more than that to playing quarterback in the league. I know because don't forget, the way coaches think. You're around them. You're at practice. You're around all this stuff. They think in terms of executing every play correctly. They don't just think about, oh, let's make a few plays. They
Yeah.
think about executing every play the right way, which is, by the way coaches should think.
Well, Greg, when we get together next, we'll be talking about the way that these Super Bowl coaches are going to be thinking and the matchup that I know everybody's excited about. Of course, the NFL matchup show is always available to you. And in fact, it's fun to go back and rewatch some of these episodes, Greg, to
I
see how we
appreciate that.
got
Yeah, it's
to this point. I enjoy doing that before some of our podcasts or some of the radio shows that I'll do just to kind of catch myself up on how these teams got to these respective points. It's always an interesting case study. So, brother, I appreciate your time as always, and I'll look forward to talking some Super Bowl with you next week.
I'm looking forward to it, Buck. Thanks.